Hi Xai'nyy of planet Earth, this is Xai'nyy and today's episode is going to be on Xai'nyy, keening, and Stresslock. First of all, what is keening? Keening are the mechanisms and manifestations that come out of a given human design when it's being used in an extreme fashion. Is keening needed? Yes, it absolutely is, and the reason why is because you need to be able to push yourself to extremes. So if you're an athlete, you need to be able to push yourself to get better. If you're studying, you need to be able to push yourself farther than you ever had before, or farther than you even knew you could go in order to do that. There needs to be an ability to do that and to know what it feels like when you're pushing yourself to your limits. Now, this is serious stuff because you're pushing yourself to your limits, but you need to do that. It's important to be able to do it, and you need to know what it feels like to take yourself to the limits, in that direction, and the degrees of extreme usage, what those feel like. And that will vary from mojo to mojo because every mojo has different powers and different rankings. There are hierarchies, so the powers might be different, the hierarchies might be different, and therefore as they stress their system, as they put extreme usage on their mojo design, it will manifest itself differently. In this context, it's important to use the term extreme momentum and modulation because there are two things that can cause keening. One is if you get your powers going excessively and you don't know how to channel them down the peak pathway, you just keep revving them up, but you don't have the engine going somewhere. That's one thing. And then you can push your system too far, but that may not be a bad thing. When you push the system, then there's a shaking of the psyche as you go to maximum capacity. It's essentially how your ship shudders and shakes as it deals with extreme momentum and modulation, extreme modulation. And extreme momentum is like your engines are going really, really hard and strong at peak capacity. Extreme modulation would be like you hitting the brakes and your car is shaking as you're attempting to hold a curb and not slide off the road. In this context, brakes and suspension are what's going to keep you from going off the rails. So of course, if you keep taking the engine into the red, you can take it past the red and things will start breaking down. So with the brakes and the suspension, you should be holding that cornering, and the issue happens when you can't hold it anymore and it starts to lose control. So keening is that point at which you're in danger of losing control. But it doesn't mean that you've lost control, it just means that you're starting to lose control, and that will happen in degrees. So there's a feeling of loss of control is coming to that point of where you're starting to take penalties, like in an RPG, penalties for taking more stress, either modulation stress or momentum stress. Now, extreme momentum is not a bad thing, it's just intense momentum, but then you can have over momentum, which implies that you have too much momentum. Then with modulation, you're going to have extreme modulation, which is okay as long as it doesn't go into over modulation territory. How should you interpret keening? You should interpret keening in the same way that you would the signs of fatigue, either mental or physical exhaustion. So if you're pushing yourself to work out or study, you need to know your limits, but you don't want to not push yourself because then you wouldn't be reaching your potential and you wouldn't grow. So it's something that you want to work up to, like going to the gym for the first time. As you learn what's taxing your system, you can do it in increments to learn what your limits are, and then go each day and learn a little more and work past what you thought were previously your limits. And a great way to do that in this case is mojo reading. When you first start, you're going to get fatigued quickly, but over time it will get to where you can go longer and longer and read more samples and deeper without getting fatigued. But to do that, you will have to read to fatigue and then recover from it. Thinking of it like a workout regime where you don't want to overtrain but you don't want to undertrain, and if you come at it from that angle, then you should be good to go. So increasing your maximum output more and more until you get to a point where increasing your regimen anymore will be strenuous to you, is the way to approach it. So Now let's get into the powers that you have as a Xai'nyy, and we'll start off with the power of Xai. With Xai, it's a momentum power, so here it's going to be extreme momentum. So when you're doing empathizing and internalizing, you're going to be getting momentum from your Xai. So as you think of your poignant perspectives or positions that you feel, where you feel the plight of another person, both their success or maybe their tragedy, these kinds of things, they build up Xai momentum, and this is a really good thing and you should do this, but then it needs to be channeled down your peak pathway and done something with, not unlike things like adrenaline. So adrenaline, when it comes into your system, it's meant to have your body do something, which is a really good thing, to very useful, really helpful. But then if you don't do something with your energy, then your body will go, I mean, there's all this energy, but I can't do anything with it, and it'll get overloaded and it'll shut down, which is not good. So the positive is that the more you internalize about things that are poignant to you, the more you empathize about poignancy in others, you're going to gain momentum, and at some point there'll be so much of this poignancy momentum that it'll be extreme and it'll start to cause keening. You just need to do something with that keening and channel it down the peak pathway. So now let's talk about the degrees of Xai keening. The first one is going to be an intense desire for me time, and you really want to have yourself some me time, and that's a good thing because it causes you to have some time to introspect and take a look at your inner state to make sure that you're doing good. So it's like a magnetic pull inward, and it'll literally pull you away from other things that you may even have an attachment to, and that can be a good thing because it can allow you to look at things without having other impingements. So the bad part is that if it's not controlled as a process, you can stay inside too long, which becomes depressing, and you can also become very sensitive to people interacting with you, which is a good thing. The second degree of keening for the Xai is going to be wildness. So wildness can be a very good thing because it doesn't let you be controlled. Nothing can control me, and that's a good thing when you shouldn't be controlled. Which can be an issue with Xai'nyy, with the Z as a modulator. It's good to have that wildness, and that kicks up as you get your Xai going. For example, if the world is trying to correctly modulate you, you may have to kick up to a keening degree of Xai, and that means that at some point, on degree number 2, you're going to get into a wild state, but that wildness is needed to kick up the Xai to the next level. Obviously, with wildness, you need to make sure that you don't cause collateral damage to yourself and others that you're going to regret later. And the third degree for Xai keening is going to be purging. Purging is an intense desire to make oneself clean, pure, untainted, unfettered, etc. So the upside is that you'll exert yourself greatly, and you'll even remove yourself from things that can be considered maybe, I don't want that, and you're like, it doesn't feel pure, so I need to be pure, and so you're purging it, and that's a very strong power, very high power. And as a Xai'nyy, you want to be able to do this power because it's very heroic. This could go wrong though if you purge at the wrong time, like if you misunderstand something or don't do it from the best place, and you do a purge either internally or in your environment to help you become pure, to feel untainted or clean, but it's not being pure in that case. It's actually doing a lot of damage that you're just going to regret later. So again, it's important that you're doing this from a good place, from sort of a good Xai position. Now let's move on to the knee. Doing knee is going to give you momentum, it's going to give you buoyancy in general, but if you go too far, it can go into mania, which can be an issue. But it's important to note that there is not just a cutoff, there are degrees. So let's talk a little bit about those degrees of keening with knee. The first degree is fantasizing. As you get momentum going, you're going to start to be a bit casual with the environment. You'll feel like you're in the story you're in, and when you're in the environment, you're experiencing as if you're acting out a fantasy. So when this happens, you may not pay attention to details other people may think are important, which is not a problem because it lets you be buoyant. It can be a problem though when it's used the wrong way, and when you're floating around, then you have to make sure that you're doing it at the right times. The second degree of keening for the Xai'nyy is the fairy flight. This is when you become very excited and you want to pull other people into the action, get some excitement going, which is cool because you can get people off couches who, might just be there, just like kind of lethargic, because you have so much contagious enthusiasm, which is really cool. However, it can get to where you're being a bit clumsy or maybe shallow with people or maybe a bit impetuous, and so you need to watch out for that. And the third degree of keening with Ni is going to be delirium. So delirium can make you feel like you're literally getting intoxicated off of the possibilities and things unfolding. And when this happens, you're sort of combining the fantasy world and this world, whatever that is, as one at the same time, which allows you to highly move people and be magical creatures, but the energy gets very worked up, and there's a danger of the mania turning into paranoia, or like the thoughts will get scattered and you're not able to control them. So the upside is that it allows for a tremendous amount of excitement that can radiate out of you into projects and people and everything around you, and so it can get things started and done, but you need to make sure that it doesn't get turned into a delirious dance that isn't fun. Now we go over to the modulation powers, which can also cause keening. So this is going to be keening that comes from extreme modulation. So as a Xai'nyy, anytime you're doing things like keeping track of detail and being meticulous, essentially things that deal with permanent record and standards of excellence, you're going to be modulating, and modulating with your Vi. So if you keep doing that too much, it can go into overmodulation. But there's a point which we call extreme modulation, and that's where keening comes in. And that's not unhealthy, it's just extreme. It means that, it's very intense, but if you know what you're doing and you're doing it to channel down the peak pathway, then that's actually really useful, and it'll get you to the next level of development. So it's important for you to need to know how to master this process, including how to master the keening process with your modulation powers. The first degree of keening with Vi is going to be pronounced pensiveness, and you can think of this as worry. Worrying is not necessarily a bad thing. Excessive worrying is when it goes bad, although there is a correct thing, the worry can be a good thing even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes there's an amount of pensiveness that's appropriate. So worrying can be, even to a keening point, can be heroic and appropriate. So if you're worrying about something obsessively that's not necessarily useful or helpful, that's when you're going to go into Stresslock. If the discomforture that you're putting yourself through doesn't yield a healthier result, then pushing yourself that far is just causing you damage. So you need to be aware of what it is that you're worrying about, and if you're doing it, too much for something that's not healthy or useful for you. The second degree of keening with Vi is going to be being absolutely on point. Being on point gives you a meticulousness of being. That's going to be modulation, because going into that mode will heavily modulate your buoyancy, your Ni. Although a lot of Xai'nyy use this for good reasons, like preparing a presentation or a performance, and that's important to have that ability to do that. So, to make sure that you stay on track of important stuff or the plan, which requires a lot of intense focus, that's a good thing. That intense focus is modulation, but again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It does get to be a bad thing when you can't flow because you're so worried and focused about sticking to some sort of specific detail, like sticking the landing, so much to the point where you can't let your Ni fly like it's supposed to. So without that excessiveness, being on point about important details is great. And the third degree of keening with Vi is going to be a focus on legacy and morbidity reports. So thinking about these things is naturally going to go away from your momentum for Xai'nyy, but they can be extremely important. So this is heavy keening because it's third degree keening, but thinking about life and death, where your life is going, how much you have left in general, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about here with the third degree of keening with Vi. And so this is heavy thinking, but it can help a Xai'nyy go down the right heroic path. So if it's something that it's something that you should be careful about not obsessing about to a point where it's freezing you or making you depressed or takes you away from your resolve. But you do want to think about these things enough to make wise and informed decisions and be prepared for what's coming up ahead, so it strengthens your resolve. So you want it to propel you forward, but not have it become like this crushing weight that will keep you in place and not let you move forward. We have Z, another modulation power. The polar power for you is Xai'nyy. So here we have extreme modulation that can make for keening, and if it goes too far, then overmodulation and Stresslock. Things that stimulate the keening for Z is score and making calls. So there's a lot more to Z, but again, like the other things that really set it off, keeping score and making calls will make you start to keen with Z. Those are the big things that make Z make your Z start to keen, and that energy starting to build up with your Z. The first degree of keening for Xai'nyy with their Z is going to be keeping score. So what happens then is that a framework, because a lot of times Xai'nyy use their Z to help them organize things to be as needed, but it's not going to be to keep score. So they can actually use a lot of Z, as all Xai'nyy mode can, without keeping score coming into the equation. At some point, though, keeping score becomes important, and keeping score may be needed in order for you to train hard enough. Like maybe today, I don't feel like staying on the bicycle, stationary bicycle, but you look and you see, oh, that's going to be 2 minutes less than I did last time. And 2 minutes is then it starts weighing on you, and 2 minutes is a little uncomfortable to do it. I have 2 more minutes in me. And so what motivates you in that instance is the fact that you're keeping score and noticing that that there would be a dip down in your progression, in your score, and your trending, and you're like, well, I don't want to be 2 minutes down. So that motivates you. But you don't want to be doing this all the time, because the way of thinking is something that's really, although it's favorable to the Xai'nyy, and it can be at certain times, it's not something that you should be doing all the time. But because then it can overmodulate your Xai. That scorekeeping can be done not only externally but also internally, where you're keeping track or score of what other people are doing. Like maybe you're thinking that someone is maybe not treating you as well as they should, or acting in the way that they should, and you're not sure of, you weren't sure of that before, but you're getting a little a little rankled, so your Z comes in, you're keening now, so you're keeping score of how much they're contributing to the lunch, how late they arrive when you meet up. That keeping score doesn't have to be negative, but it just makes sure that you're doing the right things and that other people are doing the right things. The second degree of keening with the Xai'nyy is going to be giving score. So you actually have a score, there comes a point where you may need to give it. For example, yourself, where you declare, I'm good at something, I'm good at this. Now that's not being egotistical if you're in the right situation where you can say, these are my credentials, I'm so-and-so and I'm going to conduct this seminar because this and this, and you're going there, you're going through why you're there, and also why they should do these steps, what your credentials are, and why they should listen to you. So sometimes you need to explain that to people. For a Xai'nyy, that can really feel like you're coming out of your comfort zone, but sometimes that's something that you need to do. And this is a second degree of keening over for the Xai'nyy. It obviously also relates to other people, where you're going to give them their score, not only in your head, but you're actually going to say it to them, which is more forward, more articulating. Here's how the game goes, or here's how the system goes, here's where you're at. That's very forward, and that's going to be extreme modulation for a Xai'nyy and comfortable for their system. But sometimes you really need to do that. Obviously, this is a bad thing is when the Z has been overworked and is doing this when it shouldn't, because the Xai, is maybe not in a good place and is having the Z do it for the wrong reasons, and then you're giving scores to other people, you're declaring scores that you have that are incorrect or inappropriate, and that's when it goes into overmodulation or stress lock territory. And finally, the third degree of keening with the Z for the Xai'nyy is going to be making calls. This is where you're going to make decisions that are going to affect the game. For example, does one stay or one go, or how much does one person need to get an A versus a B, or maybe a person is having a question of whether or not they did something that counts or not. This is different than having a score of where they're now, or saying to them, this is where your score is now. You're actually determining something's future. You're determining its fate. So you're making a call, a decision on something. So this could involve whether or not you use a certain business. It can involve whether you allow someone to stay in a class or leave a class yourself. All these kinds of dramatic decisions making that are based on logic. At this point, it's going to be an extreme changing of the game, and that's necessary to do sometimes, but you want to make sure that you're doing it from the right headspace. So if you're doing it from the right headspace, then it's just key, and you're going to have to do a dramatic move. Now that's going to change things, because before they were untenable, and sometimes that's necessary. So you can get out of untenable situations by making calls. So you're going to call the shot, you're going to say, we're going to play it like this, and you're actually going to have that play go forward. So that's a lot of responsibility and a lot of pushing, a lot of forward, proactive momentum, but that needs to happen sometimes, and it will be third degree of keening for Xai'nyy, but it's something that you can do and do heroically. When it's not done for the right reasons, though, then you can be seen as railroading or ramrodding people, or even beating up on yourself, like why aren't you doing this, and like really beating yourself up and being harsh on yourself and pushing yourself to overtrain. And that's when it's not good, because it gets into stress lock territory. There's a lot to keening and stress lock, but let's look at some of the key concepts now. One of them is warning system. So the warning system is the way you will, if everything is going well, be notified that there are issues. So that's generally gonna go from your momentum powers down. So your Xai will start being a little off flavor. You're not going to notice much else going on, so you're still going to be highly up on your powers. The Xai is feeling strong, but it's starting to turn a little uncomfortable, and that can be indication, but it's also the easiest for you to fix. You're able to handle a lot of energy in that area here with the Xai. So if you're starting to see that the Xai is not as good as it could be, then you can start adjusting it, and you have a lot of abilities and confidence to do so. So as it goes down from, then to the Xai and to the knee, to the knee and to the Vi and to the Z, then it becomes more extreme, to where you're being alerted by your psyche, and the knee is going to say to your Xai, hey, seriously, I'm having problems here. And if the knee is not taken care of, then the Vi will kick in, and if it's still not handled, then the Z will kick in to take care of everything. And the stress is getting more extreme, if it's not handled by the power in charge here, the source power of Xai. Another way of understanding it is in reverse, which is if you become stressed acutely very quickly, you'll start to have part of your peak pathway shut down. It shuts down in reverse. So what will happen is, if you're in a vulnerable spot, if you're getting acute vulnerable hits, those are going to hit your polar power first. So your polar, which is the polar power of Z, is the most sensitive with being hit with stuff, and it gets knocked offline the easiest. So your Z polar is the most sensitive to attack generally, and it gets knocked offline the easiest. And then your Vi, and then your Knee, and then your Xai. So it goes from Xai down as far as being healthily aware something is happening and having opportunities to do something before it goes to the next stage of severity. But if you're taking damage energetically and your system is shutting down, it shuts down in the reverse order, from a Z, Vi, and then the Knee and the Xai. So it shuts down from the polar going to the source. The source is the last to go offline because it's the strongest in the heart of the Xai'nyy. Another important concept is fetishing. Fetishing allows for you as a Xai'nyy to get a high amount of energy safely and efficiently. So this often has to do with your modulation powers, and that gets you two things. One is if you have fetishes with your Vi and your Z, it means that when you do those particular Vi and Z specialized versions of those specific activities, you don't spend as much energy. So since you don't spend as much energy and you're in a higher level and than you are, for example, in general Vi and Z, it's not going to send you into overmodulation as easily because you can handle more on that particular specialized kind of Vi and Z. Also, fetishing really allows you to line up your modulations more with your momentum, which means that you can pick up extreme amounts of momentum and you have fetish design modulators to handle that. So it's not just, regular general kind of Vi and Z, it's Vi and Z that you're particularly good at and that you have designed to pipeline down the massive amount of energy that you're building up with your momentum powers, which will then power your peak pathway. So this is something that you want to get good at. And another term that you'll hear us use is the term locked up, which is related to Stresslock. And Stresslock means that you're keening to the point of overmodulation, you're taking damage and penalties, you're losing performance capabilities because of that keening to the point of overmodulation. However, once you stop doing it, you can go back to being okay. Kind of like, going to the gym. If you were working out too hard and you start to feel your muscles burning or maybe getting a cramp, you can then stop and then it will get better. So that's Stresslock. You've pushed it to where your performance is being compromised, but you can back off. Being locked up means that you've injured yourself to the point where you're going to need rehabilitation. You can't just do it and then back off. You're actually going to need to take some time off to fix it. So you can't just stop doing what was causing the overmodulation and wait till it gets better on its own. You're actually going to have to take special measures in order for it to get better. So what are those special measures? There's a lot to it. Podler theory deals with all aspects, and it's an ongoing research project as well. But to start, your starting point is that you want to go with resetting your peak pathways. And a really good way to do that is to do a few activities such as mojo reading, hanging out in your own temple with other social alchemies that are close to you, like the inspirationals and augmentation. It basically immerses you with the correct math and can help reboot your system to go back online and have its factory settings go back into place, and your peak pathway will start cruising along like it's supposed to. So till next time, and in the meantime, know yourself, grow yourself, save the world.